Questions orales, oral questions.
Oral questions. Questions orales. Honorable Leader of the Opposition. I'll do it my way.
8 years, the spending spree of taxpayer money continues. Liberal insiders are getting rich quick while inflation and interest rates spiral out of control. Housing prices double and more than 2 million Canadians used a food bank in a single month. We now know that the Public Safety Minister's own department paid $17 million last year to the same companies that did no actual work and made millions off the ArriveCan app, even after concerns of corruption were flagged. I have a simple question for the minister. Why do shady, well-connected firms deserve $17 million of taxpayer money?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, misconduct of any kind in the procurement process is never acceptable. We're aware of the RCMP's ongoing investigation into these very serious allegations. To protect the integrity of that investigation and the work the RCMP does, we will not be able to provide any further comment. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Thornhill.
I'll answer the minister's question for him if he won't bother to do so. Under no circumstances do these companies deserve any taxpayer money, let alone $17 million. They're being investigated by the RCMP. They did no work for the government, and nobody seems to be able to understand how they got the contract. $17 million for these guys, food banks for 2 million Canadians. That's what you get with 8 years of these guys. How does anyone over there defend this scandal?
Reminder to drop a like on the stream, everyone, if you haven't yet.
The Honourable Minister.
The question being raised by the member opposite is being addressed by the RCMP. As I said before in this House, we trust our law enforcement professionals to do their work and to do it independently. We will not be participating or commenting on their investigation. We know that it has been referred to them, and our professionals in our law enforcement system will do the work necessary to come to a conclusion. Thank you.
The Honourable Member from Thornhill.
Mr. Speaker, they are certainly keeping law enforcement busy in this country. $17 million to insiders, and Canadians are still going hungry. Almost 2 million people went to a food bank in a single month. That is the highest number ever recorded. But instead, Liberals are worried about helping their well-connected friends. They are not worth the cost, and they are certainly not worth the corruption. So when will these Liberals and their NDP enablers stop helping insiders get rich and start helping Canadians put food on their table and keep a roof over their heads?
No.
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, while I'm impressed the Conservatives are finally talking about supporting some of Canada's most vulnerable, it's unfortunate that their record doesn't stand up to the scrutiny. Mr. Speaker, I was in Kelowna yesterday to announce $31.5 million to build more homes in that community. The Conservatives plan to cut the fund that is actually putting that money into Kelowna. During the pandemic, Mr. Speaker, we continued to invest so families could keep food on the table, where their leader called it big fat government programs. Canadians would be forgiven if they ask, what are the Conservatives going to cut in order to achieve their goals? Is it going to be money for housing? Is it going to be money for low-income families? We'll make the investments necessary to support Canadians in need.
The Governor of the Bank of Canada just slammed this incompetent Liberal NDP government for failed economic policies. After 8 years, he knows this Prime Minister is not worth the cost. He said their deficits fueled inflation that caused 10 interest rate hikes in 19 months, the most rapid in Canadian history. Mortgage costs have already doubled, and anyone renewing their mortgage now will see a minimum of double the interest rate. That's failure, Mr. Speaker. Will he rein in his spending and balance the budget so interest rate and inflation can come down and Canadians don't lose their homes?
Yeah.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, our government is laser focused on ensuring inflation can stabilize and interest rates can come down. We're doing it with a fiscally responsible plan, one that's seen inflation come down from its peak at 8.1% in June of 2022. It's also a pillar that our AAA credit rating has been reaffirmed. The Conservative leader's plan is to fire the Bank of Canada governor. And
I don't know, chat. What do you guys think? Is inflation coming down?
Is that going to impact
There's cost of living going up.
Once again, I'd like to ask honourable members to please keep their voices down while the other members are responding, people who have the floor. And who has the floor right now is a member from Calgary Forest Lawn.
If responsible is adding more debt than every government before them combined, I'd hate to see what the Prime Minister on a bender looks like. Robert Aslan, former Liberal advisor to the Prime Minister, admitted today at Finance Committee Liberal NDP spending is working against the Bank of Canada. Even the Governor of the Bank of Canada said government spending is making his job harder and is not helpful. While this Prime Minister has a tiff with the Bank Governor, Canadians and their homes are caught in the crossfire. After 8 years, he's not worth the cost. Will he finally rein in the spending so interest rates and inflation can come down and Canadians don't have to lose their homes?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, we believe in the independence of our institution. The Bank of Canada pursues an independent monetary policy that is best suited to Canada's economic circumstances. Keeping these institutions free from political interference isn't a matter of principle. It's a matter of protecting Canadians' livelihoods, their businesses, and our economy. Canada's triple.
How do you like them apples, eh? Everyone in the chat.
And
That's
Canada
awesome.
still has the lowest debt to GDP ratio in the G7. The Conservatives can keep fear-mongering all they want. Canadians expect better, and they deserve better.
Yeah.
Yes, we do. We don't deserve a Liberal government.
Colleagues, I'm sure we'll all want to hear the question from the member from Calgary Heritage. The Honourable Member from Calgary Heritage.
8 long years of this costly coalition's carbon tax and inflationary deficits. Record food bank usage right across this country. In the past year, the Calgary Food Bank saw demand surge by 32%. Wow. Its highest increase on record. Canadians go hungry. NDP Liberals get rich. When will this Prime Minister axe his failed carbon tax and admit he's not worth the cost?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we know that Canadian families are struggling to afford groceries, and we will continue to support families with programs like the Canada Child Benefit. We've also made funding available to food banks and charities across this country, including through the $400 million invested in the Community Services Recovery Program. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to address food insecurity across the country and support Canadians in their time of need.
The Honourable Member from Calgary Heritage.
Are these NDP Liberals even hearing themselves, Mr. Speaker? ArriveCan, SNC-Lavalin, We Charity. They get rich by printing, spending, and stealing your money. And how? They quadruple the carbon tax, a tax on food. With 2 million Canadians using food banks, where do they think the food banks get the food from?
I do ask members to please be mindful of the language which they employ to making sure that there are not disruptive statements in the House. The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we value the role that farmers play in this country providing food for our tables. But what's interesting, Mr. Speaker, and if we want to talk about making sure that life is affordable for Albertans and Canadians for the long term, where is that member of Parliament from the Conservative Party? Where are his 29 colleagues when it comes to protecting and preserving the Canada Pension Plan? I can tell you where they are, Mr. Speaker, simply not on the job. Now we have the Ontario Finance Minister concerned about this. We're going to have a special meeting over this. Albertans want to stay in the CPP. Where are the Conservative MPs? Silent and absent on the job.
Colleagues. The Honourable Member from Kamloops, Thompson Caribou.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years of this costly coalition, we hear things like this from the Vancouver Food Bank. Quote, "We see parents who are skipping meals so their children can eat. We see people who haven't eaten in days. We see seniors who haven't had produce in months, end quote. In my hometown of Kamloops, Mr. Speaker, 225 children per week are getting community food support 3 times a day. When will this NDP Liberal government wake up and recognize that they are sending Canadians to the food bank in unprecedented numbers?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Time and again, while the Conservatives have stood against helping our most vulnerable, we have fought time and time again for tangible measures that help Canadians, like the CCB, the workers' benefit, childcare, dental care, the grocery rebate, increasing OAS, the GIS, quarterly carbon price rebates. We are proud to have lifted over 2.7 million Canadians out of poverty. That's 2.7 million more Canadians that would be joining food bank lines if the Conservatives had their way.
That's right.
The Honourable Member from Kamloops, Thompson Caribou.
Mr. Speaker, isn't this the member that told Canadians that carbon taxes would be painful? Mr. Speaker, we have to remember that this Liberal NDP government wants to quadruple the carbon tax from 14 to 61 cents a litre. They have had 8 years to get it right, and they got it wrong, Mr. Speaker. I worry that this Christmas we won't be giving toys. People will be getting canned food. This Prime Minister is not worth the cost. Will this NDP Liberal government end their costly inflation and carbon tax increases?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, I think Canadians are wising up to the fact that the Conservatives would cut programs for some of the most vulnerable Canadians in our communities. Our government has put in place that have lifted almost 500,000 kids out of poverty, that have reduced childcare fees by 50%, saving families hundreds of dollars per month, to name just 2. Canadians also know that the Conservatives won't step up to fight climate change, would reverse course, make pollution free again, drive up emissions with reckless abandon. So let me ask the Conservatives a question. When will these slash and burn Conservatives realize that their reckless behavior puts the future of Canadian families and our planet at risk?
After 8 years, this NDP Liberal government isn't worth the cost or the corruption. The RCMP criminal investigation into the Prime Minister's wrongdoing during the SNC-Lavalin scandal was thwarted after the Prime Minister hid behind cabinet confidence and refused to turn over documents. On Monday, he doubled down on his cover-up, ordering NDP and Liberal MPs to block the Commissioner of the RCMP from testifying about his obstruction. A simple question: what does the Prime Minister have to hide?
Hear, hear, hear. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, I find it ironic that the Conservatives would actually use an issue that was settled years ago and reconfirmed that the RCMP the Commissioner has stated, quote, that he was very comfortable with the decision being made. But, Mr. Speaker, while speaking about committee, I find it ironic that the Conservatives are trying to use a closed case to block the investigation of 5 Conservative members on a lavish trip to London paid for by individuals who want to ensure that pollution is free again.
Colleagues, I please encourage you to listen to your wits. The Honourable Member from St. Albert, Edmonton.
Speaker, with this Prime Minister, it's corruption and cover-up all the time.
More and more corruption.
A Prime Minister who obstructed justice to protect SNC, who fired his Attorney General after she spoke truth to power, who obstructed a criminal investigation into his potential criminal wrongdoing, and who has now silenced the RCMP Commissioner from testifying at committee about his obstruction. Again, if the Prime Minister has nothing to hide, then why won't he let the Commissioner speak at committee and testify?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, the fact remains Conservatives had 26 opportunities to bring in the RCMP and bring forward a motion. But what I find interesting is why are the Conservatives hiding the investigation or the study that members would like to have in regards to their lavish travel to London by lobbyists who would like to make pollution free again? $1,800 worth of champagne, a Savoy restaurant, $1,000 for a three-course lunch, Mr. Speaker, $1,200 at an oyster bar, Mr. Speaker. Perhaps the Conservatives should realize the hypocrisy in terms of
Colleagues, you can see how this works.
Oh, here he goes again, power tripping.
Excited, then the other side start getting excited, and it just gets a little worse. We need to exercise a lot of self-restraint in listening to the questions as well as listening to the answers.